This is Collegian Wired, East Hollywood News. I'm Christian Chavez. For our first story, LAPD officers began to evacuate a homeless encampment at Echo Park in March 2021. They decided to arrest the homeless who would not disperse and the journalists who were covering the story. That included a Collegian reporter, Matthew Rodriguez, with our first story.
Ladies and gentlemen, you are no longer free to leave. You are under arrest. Please do not resist. You are under arrest and are no longer free to leave. Stand your ground!
Tension between police, protesters, and journalists is in full view. The LAPD declares the scene at Echo Park an unlawful assembly. They say protesters must disperse. That includes homeless who live in the park, and residents, and advocates who support them.
That also includes journalists, like Kalia Williams, a reporter from the Collegian at LA City College.
It's kind of recording a little bit of the crowd, just kind of observing, and then I got swept into the crowd. And as I was getting swept, some of the organizers were saying, oh, they're going to like kettle us down on Sunset. But as we started backing up, they ended up kettling us sooner. And a bunch of cops start coming out of the alleys. And then as soon as they like kettled us, they announced that we were all under arrest.
LAPD officers rounded up journalists and legal observers from the National Lawyers Guild and led them away 2 by 2. Police released reporters from the mainstream outlets like the LA Times and Spectrum Cable eventually, but many journalists who did not have an LAPD press credential went to jail. Olivia Martinez lives in the Echo Park area. She says some journalists who were not detained began live streaming the arrests of their colleagues.
The reason I wasn't arrested is because basically if you were on one side of the street, it was just like luck of the draw. If you're on one side of the street, you got kettled and eventually arrested. And then if you were on the other side of the street, you basically got pushed off the, just these people want to hide poverty. So they're just going to move it somewhere else and think that, works. And because they don't want that in their neighborhood or whatever.
Criticism of the arrests came quickly. The executive director of the ACLU called it militarized police action. Hector Viegra says it was a cruel way to treat displaced persons.
In a statement, he said mass arrests of protesters, journalists, and others would not hide the city's actions. Free speech advocates say LAPD got it wrong.
Our position is very clear under the First Amendment of the United States Constitution, as well as various local state statutes and the state constitution of California. The press should be able to record and document the activity of the police, even during an unlawful assembly when the general public is required to disperse. And we think that's a critical element of the constitutional privileges of the press, because the idea is to prevent potential abuses.
Albert Cerna is a student at San Francisco State University. He writes for a newspaper in East Los Angeles.
So systemically, big organizations, people in power don't want us to always do our job. They want us to do our job when it suits them, when it makes them look good. But when we're critical or even doing exposure of certain bad behavior, things that aren't necessarily bad, but just not really right, that go against the broader interest of the public, that's when the issue comes in. And as student journalists, we don't have the big legacy newspaper names behind us. We don't have always the ability to sue the people or go to court or take action in ways that big professional publications can. And so we're an easy target.
Student journalists may not have the influence of mainstream media to back them up, but they have rights that the LAPD ignored. It is information that did not make its way to the police frontline, and that needs to change.
There is some disagreement, I would say, actively between the press and the police about certain interpretations of law. And today, we all want to see a peaceful resolution to these sorts of situations. So with the student journalists, but it's important to remember student journalists in this state, by law, have the same rights as all members of the press.
Meanwhile, Kalia spent several hours restrained in zip ties and transported in non-COVID safe conditions for exercising her First Amendment rights. But she says she was not intimidated or afraid. Kalia and others who were arrested found safety in numbers.
I learned what this was that day, but it's basically when police trap you, when they tell you to disperse, but they kind of like trap you in with like no way to really leave.
City Attorney Mike Fuhr dropped all charges against protesters, journalists, and legal observers. He says there was no reason to arrest peaceful protesters. The outcry against the actions of the LAPD continues as the department considers changes to its press pass policy.
But the question remains, if journalists cannot watch the police, and if journalists cannot watch the government, then who will? This is Matthew Rodriguez reporting for LA Collegian Wired.
Governor Gavin Newsom signed Senate Bill 98 into law in October. It allows reporters to continue to do their work even when police officers declare an unlawful assembly. For years, the fault line shook things up after hours for clubgoers in East Hollywood, but the gay nightclub became a casualty of the pandemic. Will Torres takes a look back at the neighborhood spot.
Hello everyone, this is culture reporter William B. Torres from the Collegian Times, and I'm standing in front of an iconic building in East Hollywood, once known as the Fault Line. This was a safe haven for the LGBTQ community and just stone's throw from LA City College. But the pandemic shook things up here at the Fault Line, as well as many other businesses in Los Angeles, and unfortunately, the legendary gay bar closed its doors.
But thanks to the video images of Michael Gyrox and the WeHo Times, we can revisit that slice of cultural life in Los Angeles.
This is Christopher Brown, and I'm so sad to hear about the unfortunate news that our beloved Fault Line will be closing. Fault Line was my neighborhood bar. Had so many fun nights there with friends for birthdays and just random Thursday night parties, going and having a good time. I can always escape to Fault Line to get a great drink and know that I was going to meet somebody awesome, whether it be the bartender or just another person who was there to have a drink. Fault Line staple here in the city, and it's definitely going to be missed.
I remember nothing more exciting and decadent than Sunday beer bust at Fault Line. My friends and I would arrive once the party was in full swing, and the possibilities were endless. One Sunday, while I was cruising around the bar, I noticed one of my friends sitting on a shoe-shine chair station, which was furniture perfectly suited for Fault Line's leather culture, while he was receiving an oral gesture from another patron. Javier Agundez, 44, Los Angeles, California.
Before the Fault Line and before the Abbey, members of the LA gay community were in search of a nightlife and acceptance in one place. They found it in downtown LA at the new Vienna Buffet. It opened in 1891. It was located roughly in the same place as the City Hall building built in 1928. The restaurant with live music gathered men inside, including what were then called she-boys. The newspaper reported that scandalous things were happening in closed boxes behind the private curtains inside the new Vienna Buffet. The restaurant closed on May 21st, 1902. By 1960, the gay community found comfort in Silver Lake at the Black Cat Tavern. During the Sunset Strip curfew riots in 1966, also known as the hippie riots, the gay bar became the impetus for unprecedented resistance among the gay community and most visible example of the city's gay rebellion. The Black Cat Tavern was established in November 1966. 2 months later, on New Year's Eve, it was raided by undercover police. The undercover cops attacked several patrons inside the bar because several patrons from the same gender were caught kissing each other as they celebrated the new year. 14 patrons inside the bar were arrested for assault and public lewdness. The raid and subsequent protests inspired the first gay newspaper, The Advocate, in 1967. The Advocate, which began as Los Angeles newspaper for group Pride, which stands for Personal Rights Through Defense and Education, helped bring awareness to what was happening in the gay community during the Black Cat protest. Also in the 1960s, Judy Garland's then late husband, Sid Luft, bought a building in East Hollywood and named it Red Rouge. In 1963, Garland placed her handprints and signed her name on the cement floor behind the back bar. Since Judy Garland, the building was a haven for the gay community for over 40 years, and it was last known as the Fault Line. It may be the end of the rainbow for the Fault Line because of the pandemic, but history has showed the gay community to be resilient and optimistic. Los Angeles will continue to remain the vanguard of queer culture in America.
That's our time for now. Thank you for watching Collegian Wired, East Hollywood News. I'm Christian Chavez.